Mother and children saved during wolf attack. A lone rancher's strength united them forever. Welcome to today's story. You're about to witness a gripping tale from the Old West, where survival meets destiny on the vast American frontier. Watch as a mother's desperate journey with her children takes an unexpected turn when danger strikes, and discover how one act of courage can change lives forever. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the endless prairie as Martha Collins guided her weathered wagon along the dusty trail. The wooden wheels creaked rhythmically against the uneven ground, creating a steady soundtrack to their journey westward. Beside her sat 8-year-old Samuel, his bright blue eyes constantly scanning the horizon with the curiosity of youth, while 6-year-old Emma nestled against her mother's side, clutching a worn rag doll. "Mama, how much farther?" Samuel asked, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and fatigue. They had been traveling for 3 days now, leaving behind the painful memories of their old life in Missouri. "Not much longer, sweetheart," Martha replied, though uncertainty clouded her voice. The map tucked beneath her seat showed they were still 2 days from the nearest settlement. "We'll find our new home soon." The cold October wind whipped through the prairie grass, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Martha pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down like the gray clouds gathering overhead. 3 months had passed since consumption took her husband, James, leaving her alone with 2 young children and mounting debts she couldn't pay. "Look, Mama, horses." Emma pointed excitedly toward a distant ridge where wild mustangs galloped freely across the landscape. Martha smiled despite her worries. "They're beautiful, aren't they? Just like we'll be free to start over." The wagon hit a particularly deep rut, jolting them all forward. Samuel grabbed the side rail to steady himself, while Emma giggled at the unexpected bounce. Martha's hands tightened on the reins as she guided their single horse, a gentle mare named Buttercup, around the worst of the trail damage. As they crested a small hill, the vast expanse of the frontier stretched before them like an ocean of golden grass. In the distance, purple mountains touched the sky, promising shelter and new opportunities. But between here and there lay mile after mile of unpredictable wilderness. "Mama, I'm hungry," Emma whispered, tugging at Martha's sleeve. Martha reached into their dwindling supply bag and pulled out a piece of hardtack and some dried beef. "Here, darling, make it last." She tried to keep the worry from her voice, but their food wouldn't last another week if they had to ration it much longer. Samuel studied his mother's face with the perceptiveness that often surprised her. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Mama?" "Of course we are," Martha said firmly, though her heart raced with uncertainty. "The Lord provides for those who help themselves, and we're certainly doing that." The afternoon wore on with monotonous regularity, the endless roll of wheels, the rhythmic clip-clop of Buttercup's hooves, and the whisper of wind through the grass. Martha found herself lost in thought, remembering James's promise that they would build a ranch together in the West, where the children could grow up free and strong. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Martha spotted something that made her breath catch. Dark shapes moved through the grass about a quarter-mile ahead, too large to be prairie dogs, and moving with a purposeful gait that spelled trouble. "Samuel, take the reins," she whispered urgently, reaching for the rifle James had insisted she learn to use. "What is it, Mama?" Samuel's voice cracked slightly as he sensed his mother's tension. Before Martha could answer, a bone-chilling howl echoed across the prairie, followed by another, then another. The shapes in the grass became clearer, at least 6 of them, moving in their direction with the calculated patience of experienced hunters. Buttercup's ears flicked nervously, and she began to dance sideways, sensing the predators nearby. Martha's hands shook as she checked the rifle's ammunition. 3 bullets. 6 wolves. "Mama, what are those sounds?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Martha's mind raced through their options. The nearest trees were at least a mile away, too far to reach before the wolves closed the distance. The wagon wasn't built for speed, and Buttercup, though loyal, was no match for determined predators. "Listen to me carefully," Martha said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're going to stay very calm and very quiet. Samuel, keep Buttercup moving forward slowly. Emma, climb into the back of the wagon and stay low." The wolves had spread out now, forming a loose circle that was gradually tightening. Their gray and brown coats blended seamlessly with the prairie grass, making them difficult to track. Martha could see their yellow eyes glinting in the fading light, calculating and patient. One of the larger wolves, clearly the pack leader, stepped boldly into the open about 50 yards ahead of them. It stood motionless, studying the approaching wagon with an intelligence that sent chills down Martha's spine. This wasn't just hunger, this was strategic hunting. "Mama, I'm scared," Emma whimpered from the wagon bed. "I know, sweetheart. Just stay down." Martha raised the rifle to her shoulder, though she knew 3 bullets against 6 wolves would only buy them moments at best. The pack leader threw back its head and released another howl, long and mournful, echoing across the empty landscape. It was a signal, and the other wolves began moving closer, their paws silent on the soft earth. Martha's heart pounded as she realized their desperate situation. They were 2 days from help, surrounded by predators in the middle of nowhere, with no one coming to save them. The dreams of a new life in the West suddenly seemed like foolish fantasies. But then, just as despair began to settle in her chest, she heard something that made her heart skip the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats, thundering across the prairie like an answer to her unspoken prayers. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the jingling of spurs and the creak of leather. From behind a low ridge emerged a lone rider on a powerful black stallion, moving with the confident grace of someone born to the saddle. The man sat tall and straight, his weathered face shadowed by a broad-brimmed hat, and a rifle rested easy in his hands. Thomas Mackenzie had been tracking this wolf pack for 3 days, ever since they'd killed 2 of his calves near the northern boundary of his ranch. At 34, he'd spent half his life on these plains, and he knew the rhythms of the wilderness as well as any man alive. When he spotted the wagon surrounded by the circling predators, every instinct screamed at him to act. The wolves had noticed him too. Their attention was now divided between the vulnerable family in the wagon and this new threat approaching from their flank. The pack leader snarled, showing teeth that gleamed white in the gathering dusk. Thomas raised his rifle, without slowing his horse's charge. The first shot rang out across the prairie like thunder, and the lead wolf dropped instantly. The crack of gunfire startled the remaining wolves, but they didn't scatter as Thomas had hoped. Instead, they seemed to grow more aggressive, sensing that their hunting window was closing. "Get that wagon moving," Thomas shouted to Martha as he rode past, working the lever action on his rifle. "Head for those rocks over there." Martha snapped the reins, urging Buttercup into a faster pace. The mare, already nervous from the wolf's presence, needed little encouragement to put distance between herself and the predators. The wagon bounced violently over the uneven ground, and Martha heard Emma crying in the back. A second wolf leaped toward Thomas's horse, but the black stallion reared skillfully, striking out with iron-shod hooves. The wolf twisted away, snarling, but unharmed. Thomas's second shot took down another predator, but the remaining 4 had now committed fully to the attack. "Samuel, hold tight to those reins," Martha called over the noise of the chase. Her son's knuckles were white with effort, but he kept Buttercup on course toward the rocky outcropping Thomas had indicated. 2 wolves broke off to pursue the wagon, while the other 2 continued to harass Thomas and his mount. The black stallion was nimble and well-trained, dancing away from snapping jaws while giving his rider clear shots. But Thomas could see that the wagon wolves were gaining ground on the slower-moving target. He urged his horse forward, angling to intercept the pursuing predators. His third shot went wide as his horse stumbled slightly in a prairie dog hole, and Thomas cursed under his breath. He could see the terrified faces of the children in the wagon, could hear the mother's voice calling out encouragement to her son. The larger of the 2 wolves chasing the wagon made a desperate leap toward Buttercup's hindquarters. Martha swung her rifle around and fired, the recoil nearly knocking her from the wagon seat. Her shot caught the wolf in the shoulder, spinning it away from the horse but not killing it. "Good shot," Thomas called out, impressed by the woman's courage under pressure. He put his heels to the stallion's sides, closing the distance rapidly. The wounded wolf limped away into the tall grass, while its companion seemed to lose heart without the pack leader's presence. The remaining 2 wolves that had been harassing Thomas chose that moment to retreat as well, melting away into the prairie like gray ghosts. Thomas kept his rifle ready as he rode a wide circle around the area, making sure the threat had truly passed. The wounded wolf was nowhere to be seen, likely crawling off to either recover or die alone. Pack hunters rarely fought to the death when the odds turned against them. Martha had managed to get the wagon to the shelter of the rocks Thomas had indicated. She sat trembling on the driver's seat, the empty rifle across her knees, watching as their unexpected savior approached. Samuel still held the reins with a death grip, while Emma peeked out from the wagon bed with wide, frightened eyes. Thomas dismounted about 10 yards away, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. He could see that the family was still processing what had just happened, and the last thing he wanted was to frighten them further. "Everyone all right?" he asked, his voice carrying a gentle Texas drawl that seemed to ease the tension in the air. Martha found her voice first. "Yes, I were fine. Thanks to you." She climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs, her heart still racing from the encounter. Thomas took off his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature gray and kind, brown eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of squinting into prairie sunshine. "Name's Thomas Mackenzie. I've got a ranch about 5 miles south of here." "Martha Collins," she replied, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "These are my children, Samuel and Emma." Thomas shook her hand briefly, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the determined set of her jaw that suggested inner strength. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Samuel finally released his hold on the reins and jumped down from the wagon. "Mister, that was the bravest thing I ever saw. You rode right at those wolves like you weren't scared at all." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Well, son, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing, even when you are scared." Emma climbed out of the wagon more cautiously, still clutching her rag doll. She studied Thomas with the intense scrutiny that only children possess, as if trying to determine whether this stranger could truly be trusted. "Are the wolves coming back?" she asked in a small voice. Thomas knelt down to her eye level, his expression serious but reassuring. "No, little miss. Wolves are smart hunters, but they don't like fair fights. They'll find easier prey elsewhere." Martha looked around at the vast emptiness surrounding them, the reality of their situation settling in. "Mr. Mackenzie, I can't thank you enough for what you did. If you hadn't come along when you did, no need to think about what might have been," Thomas said, standing and dusting off his knees. "The question now is where you folks are headed. This isn't exactly prime traveling territory." Martha hesitated, suddenly aware of how their situation must look to this man or woman, alone with 2 children, clearly not prepared for the dangers of frontier travel. "We're heading west, looking for a place to start over." Thomas studied the family more carefully, noting the quality of their worn clothes, the careful repairs that spoke of making do with little, and the determined set of Martha's shoulders, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Well, Mrs. Collins, it's getting dark, and you don't want to be traveling these parts at night. There are things out here besides wolves that might cause trouble." He gestured toward his horse. "My ranch isn't far. You're welcome to spend the night, get a hot meal and a safe place to sleep." Martha's first instinct was to politely decline. She'd learned to be wary of strangers' kindness, knowing it often came with strings attached. But looking at her children's tired faces and feeling the cold wind picking up, she realized they had few choices. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Mackenzie, but we don't want to impose ... double quotes, no imposition at all," Thomas said firmly. "Besides, your horse could use some grain and rest, and those children need a warm meal. It's not safe out here for anyone traveling alone, especially at night." Samuel looked up at his mother hopefully. "Can we, Mama? I'm awful tired, and Emma's been scared all day." The decision was made by the practical realities of their situation. Martha nodded slowly. "We'd be grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Mackenzie. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this one." Thomas's ranch house emerged from the darkness like a beacon of civilization in the vast wilderness. Golden light spilled from the windows, and smoke drifted lazily from the stone chimney, promising warmth and safety after the day's harrowing events. The structure was modest but well built, with a wide front porch and sturdy corrals that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Martha felt a wave of relief wash over her as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. Her legs were still shaky from the encounter with the wolves, and the emotional toll of the day was beginning to catch up with her. Samuel and Emma pressed close to her sides, their earlier excitement giving way to exhaustion. "Come on inside and get warm," Thomas said, lifting Emma effortlessly when her small legs proved too tired to carry her up the porch steps. "I'll tend to your horse in a minute." The interior of the ranch house was a revelation. Martha had expected the typical bachelor's quarters, sparse furnishings and basic necessities. Instead, she found a home that was clearly lived in and cared for. Hand-carved furniture filled the main room. Colorful woven rugs covered the wooden floors, and books lined shelves that had been built with obvious skill and care. "This is beautiful," Martha said softly, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a dining table that must have taken weeks to craft. Thomas seemed almost embarrassed by the compliment. "I've had a lot of time on my hands over the years. Keeping busy helps pass the winter months." He set Emma down gently and moved toward the fireplace, adding logs to build up the flames. "Sit yourselves down anywhere you're comfortable." Samuel was immediately drawn to the bookshelves, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mama, look at all these books. There must be 100 of them." "More like 200, Thomas said with a chuckle. "I order them from back east whenever I can. Gets pretty quiet out here, and reading helps fill the evenings." Martha settled into a comfortable armchair near the fire, pulling Emma onto her lap. The warmth felt like a luxury after days of cold prairie winds, and she found herself relaxing for the first time since they'd left Missouri. "You live here alone, Mr. Mackenzie?" "Yes, ma'am. Built this place about 8 years ago, when I first claimed the land. Always figured I'd fill it with a family someday." But he trailed off, focusing intently on the fire. "Well, life doesn't always go according to plan." There was a story there, Martha realized, but she was too polite to pry. Instead, she watched as Thomas moved efficiently around the kitchen area, clearly comfortable with domestic tasks that many men left to their wives. "I've got some stew that's been simmering all day," he said, lifting the lid of a large pot hanging over the cooking fire. The rich aroma filled the room, making Samuel's stomach growl audibly. "And there's fresh bread if you don't mind it being a day old." "That sounds like a feast to us," Martha said honestly. Their supplies had been running low, and they'd been eating sparingly for the past 2 days. As Thomas ladled generous portions into wooden bowls, Emma slipped down from her mother's lap and approached him shyly. "Mr. Thomas, are you a cowboy, like in the stories?" Thomas smiled, handing her a smaller bowl. "I suppose I am, little miss. Though it's not quite as exciting as the stories make it sound. Mostly, it's just taking care of cattle and fixing fences." "Do you have lots of cows?" Samuel asked, accepting his bowl eagerly. "About 300 head, Thomas replied, settling into a chair across from them. "Plus some horses and a few chickens that think they run the place." Martha tasted the stew and closed her eyes in appreciation. It was perfectly seasoned with herbs she couldn't identify, and the meat was tender enough to cut with a spoon. "This is delicious. You're quite the cook." "Had to learn or starve," Thomas said pragmatically, "though I'll admit it's nice to have someone to cook for, besides myself." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. Thomas asked about their journey, and Martha found herself sharing more than she'd intended about their reasons for heading west. The children, emboldened by food and warmth, peppered Thomas with questions about ranch life, which he answered with patient good humor. "Why don't you have a wife?" Emma asked, with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "Emma," Martha scolded, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But Thomas didn't seem offended. "It's all right. That's a fair question." He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I was engaged once, back in Austin. But she decided ranch life wasn't for her. Said it was too isolated, too dangerous." He shrugged, though Martha caught a glimpse of old pain in his eyes. She wasn't wrong about either of those things. "Well, she was foolish," Martha said impulsively, then immediately regretted speaking so freely. Thomas looked surprised, then pleased. "That's kind of you to say, Mrs. Collins." After dinner, Thomas showed them to the guest room, which was clearly prepared for visitors despite his solitary lifestyle. The bed was large enough for Martha and Emma to share comfortably, while Samuel could use the small cot by the window. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," Thomas said. "And don't worry about those wolves. They won't come near the house." As Martha tucked her children into their beds, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since James's death, she felt truly safe and protected. The ranch house seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace, shutting out the dangers and uncertainties of the world beyond its walls. "Mama," Emma whispered as Martha kissed her goodnight. "I like Mr. Thomas. He's nice." "Yes, he is," Martha agreed, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Very nice." Samuel was already half asleep, but he mumbled, "Can we stay here forever, Mama?" The question hit Martha like a physical blow. The thought had already crossed her mind, but hearing it from her son's lips made it real. Could they stay? Was there a place for them here in this unexpected sanctuary? "Go to sleep, sweetheart," she whispered. "We'll talk about everything in the morning." But Martha lay awake, long after the children's breathing had deepened into sleep. Through the thin walls, she could hear Thomas moving around the main room, probably reading by the fire as he did every night. The sound was comforting, the presence of a strong, capable man standing guard between her family and the darkness outside. For the first time in months, Martha allowed herself to hope. Maybe their journey wasn't about reaching some distant destination. Maybe it was about finding this place, this man, this chance at a new beginning she'd never dared to imagine. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. I love hearing your thoughts. Morning light filtered through the clean windows of the guest room, and Martha woke to the sound of voices and laughter from the kitchen. She dressed quickly and found Thomas teaching Samuel how to flip pancakes, while Emma sat at the table, giggling at their attempts. "Mama," Emma called out when she spotted her mother. "Mr. Thomas is making pancakes that looked like animals." Indeed, the plate in front of Emma held what could generously be called a rabbit-shaped pancake, though it bore a closer resemblance to a lopsided star. Thomas looked up from the griddle with flour in his hair and a sheepish grin on his face. "I may have overestimated my artistic abilities," he admitted, gesturing to Samuel's creation, which was supposedly a horse, but looked more like an abstract blob. "They're perfect," Martha said warmly, meaning it. The sight of her children laughing and playing, their faces bright with happiness instead of the worry that had shadowed them for weeks, was worth more than any culinary masterpiece. As they sat down to breakfast, Thomas grew more serious. "Mrs. Collins, I've been thinking about your situation. Winter's coming on fast out here, and traveling with children in the cold months." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Well, it's not safe, and finding work in most towns this time of year is nearly impossible." Martha's heart sank. She'd been hoping he might offer them some way to stay, but it sounded like he was gently suggesting they move on before the weather turned worse. "I have a proposition," Thomas continued, and hope flickered in Martha's chest again. "I could use help around here. The house is too big for one person, and there's more work than I can handle alone. Cooking, mending, keeping the books, helping with the animals, there's plenty to do." Samuel's eyes lit up. "Could I help with the horses?" "Mr. Thomas, if your mother agrees, I'd be glad to teach you," Thomas said, then turned his attention back to Martha. "I can offer room and board, plus wages. Nothing fancy, but enough to help you get back on your feet. And when spring comes, if you decide you want to move on, I'll make sure you have everything you need for the journey." Martha stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Mackenzie, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't accept charity." "It's not charity," Thomas said firmly. "I need the help, and you need work. It's a fair trade." He paused, his brown eyes meeting hers directly. "Besides, this place has been too quiet for too long. It could use the sound of children's laughter." Emma bounced in her chair. "Can we stay, Mama, please?" Martha looked around the warm, welcoming kitchen, at her children's hopeful faces, at Thomas's kind but carefully neutral expression. 3 months ago, she'd been a grieving widow with no prospects and mounting debts. Now she was being offered not just survival, but a chance to rebuild their lives in a place where they were wanted. "If you're certain we wouldn't be imposing," she began. "You'd be doing me the favor," Thomas assured her. "Then yes," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'd be honored to stay." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as they settled into their new routine. Martha took over the household management with an efficiency that impressed Thomas, organizing systems for everything from meal planning to bookkeeping. Her previous experience helping James with their small farm served her well in adapting to ranch life. Samuel threw himself into learning ranch work with the enthusiasm of youth. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher, showing him how to care for the horses, mend fences, and even the basics of herding cattle. The boy's natural aptitude surprised them both, and his confidence grew daily under Thomas's encouraging guidance. Emma appointed herself official assistant to everyone, helping her mother with cooking and following Samuel and Thomas around the ranch whenever they'd let her. Her cheerful chatter and endless questions brought smiles to faces that had grown accustomed to solitude. Martha found herself watching Thomas more than she probably should. He was unfailingly kind to her children, treating Samuel like the son he'd never had and showing Emma the gentle patience of a natural father. But it was the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, that made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt since her courting days with James. One evening in November, as the first snow began to fall, Martha found Thomas on the front porch after dinner, watching the white flakes dance in the light from the windows. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said, joining him despite the cold. "Just thinking how different this place feels now," he said honestly. "A month ago, I was eating alone, talking to my horse, and going days without hearing another human voice. Now you have a house full of chaos, Martha finished with a laugh. Now I have a family, Thomas corrected softly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Martha felt her breath catch as Thomas turned to face her fully. Martha, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still grieving your husband. But I have to tell you. He stopped, running a hand through his hair nervously. Having you here, having the children here, it's changed everything for me. Martha's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. Thomas, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just needed you to know how I feel. This isn't just about helping you get back on your feet anymore. Not for me. Martha stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was trying so hard to hide. It's not just about getting back on our feet for me either, she admitted. You saved us that day, Thomas. Not just from the wolves, but from everything we were running from. You gave us a home when we had nowhere to go, and you've been kinder to my children than they had any right to expect from a stranger. They're not my children, Thomas said, but I love them as if they were. And I love you, Martha whispered, the words out before she could stop them. Thomas's face transformed with wonder and joy. Truly. Instead of answering with words, Martha reached up and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude, hope, and newfound love into that single moment. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and snow continued to fall around them like a blessing. Marry me, Thomas said urgently. I know it's fast, and I know people will talk, but I can't imagine my life without you and the children in it. Say you'll marry me, Martha. Yes, she laughed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, of course I'll marry you. From inside the house came the sound of Samuel and Emma arguing over a checker game. Their voices bright with the security of children who knew they were safe and loved. Soon those voices would be joined by others, the children they would have together. The family they would build in this place where a desperate mother's journey had led to unexpected love. As Thomas spun Martha around in the falling snow, both of them laughing with pure joy, the wolves howled somewhere in the distant darkness. But this time, the sound held no threat, only the wild music of the frontier, celebrating the courage it took to start over and the love that made it all worthwhile. Their story would become legend in the territory, told and retold around evening fires, the tale of a brave woman who found love in the most unexpected place, and a lonely rancher who discovered that sometimes the family you choose is even stronger than the one you're born into. What an incredible journey we've shared together. From the terrifying wolf attack to the beautiful love story that blossomed in the most unexpected circumstances. This tale shows us that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our greatest blessings. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling me which part touched your heart the most. Did you love the dramatic rescue scene, or were you more moved by the tender family moments? I read every comment and love connecting with viewers who appreciate these heartfelt stories. What other historical periods or themes would you like to see in future videos? Your suggestions help me create content that you'll truly enjoy. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these compelling stories of courage, love, and new beginnings. There are so many more amazing tales waiting to bet.